guys, welcome to Graphic Novel Gems. I'm your host, Tim Mitchell, and this is Episode 0.
Episode 0!
Episode 0.
Episode 0!
Episode 0. Episode 0. Episode 0. Episode 0.
Episode 0!
This is Episode 0.
Episode 0!
Episode 0. Sorry about that. Got a little bit crazy there. Today we're going to talk about what a graphic novel is. First off, I want to talk about graphic novels as a medium and what they look like. And then I'm going to talk about the different genres that are within graphic novels. So let's take a minute and let's talk about what graphic novels look like. Graphic novels come in many shapes and sizes. What a graphic novel is pretty much a thicker version of your classic comic book. This comic book is a Superman issue number 33. This is a version of the first comic book that I ever bought. And for the longest time I was a comic book collector, and comic books were precious to me. As you can see, this comic book, I've put a plastic bag over it, and I've got what they call a board to hold it in stock and to keep it upright and to keep its shape. So I've bagged and boarded this precious comic book. But graphic novels are a little different. They feature the same sort of what you'll see in a comic book as far as illustrations accompanied by word balloons and thought balloons and such. But graphic novels are thicker usually. For example, here's a Justice League of America graphic novel, and we're going to talk about what kind of graphic novel this is in a little bit. They call this a trade paperback. But as you can see, it's thicker, and it has more than just one story in it. It goes throughout several different issues of a comic book, and like I said, we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But graphic novels come in all shapes and all sizes. They come in very, very small, almost like a digest format. This is Lone Wolf and Cub, the first volume here. Great stuff. It's a Japanese comic book, what they call manga, or manga, some people pronounce it. Graphic novels come in anthologies. An anthology is basically just like what it sounds like. Several different creators, illustrators, writers get together, and they write short stories and that are collected into one book. I picked this up at a comic book convention here in Kansas City several weeks ago, or just a few weeks ago, excuse me, and this one's called Awesome. That's the name of this anthology. Lots of great anthologies out there for comic books. You can also find graphic novels in the format of an omnibus. I've got a few examples over here. Here's an Aliens omnibus. What they did with this is they collected lots of different Aliens short stories, and they published them in these several volume omnibuses. Omnibus basically means it's a very thick, very lengthy collection of comic books. It's almost like a fatter version of a trade paperback, which again, we'll get into that in a little bit. Here's a Zot omnibus. You can see how thick that sucker is. Very thick collection there. I've also got an Essential Daredevil omnibus. In these omnibuses, the original works were in color, but they are reprinted in black and white, which is kind of fun and kind of interesting. It's kind of cool because it almost feels like you get to see the original artwork in its penciled and inked out finality. So there's I covered the anthology, I covered the omnibus, there's the trade paperback, which we'll get into in a little bit, there's manga, and that about covers it, except for the original deal. Now, in the late 70s through the 80s, the word graphic novel got a lot of popularity. Will Eisner did not coin the phrase graphic novel, but he was one of the first artists to publish a work that made the name graphic novel get a lot of notoriety. His graphic novel called The Contract with God came out very late 70s, and on the cover of it, over in this area here, on the original copy, it said, a graphic novel. Now, he put that on the cover of his book because he wanted to distinguish his book that he was publishing from a regular comic book that featured superheroes or funny tales, as it were, and he wanted to be able to approach adult readers with a little bit more mature themes. He could use language that was a little more mature, he could use illustrations that was a little more mature, and he could overall make a plot that was a lot more mature rather than just sticking to a regular comic book format. Hence the phrase graphic novel. And it caught wind. There were a lot of creators that really liked the phrase, that decided to do their own books. There's works like The Dark Knight Returns, which is a Batman story, but it's set in a darker, more serious context than a typical Batman story usually is. There's works like Watchmen, which is insanely popular, and they made a movie about it a few years ago, and that was another take on a comic book story that was much darker, much more adult themed. Mature readers only.